Chiquitos, welcome back to the kitchen. If you couldn't tell based on your ingredients, today we're making Italian food. One of the things I love about Italian food is that it's really fresh and it's really seasonal, which, as we've been talking about over the last few weeks, means that what you're eating grows in that season, which makes the flavors that much more intense and that much more delicious, and it's really good for our environment. So the first recipe we're making today, actually both the recipes we're making today, are really simple. I think sometimes when we think about European food, like Italian food or French food, we think of it as like really fancy or hard. And the reality is that most Italian recipes, if they seem complicated, it's usually because they take a long period of time to cook. But for the most part, the ingredients that you're using are really few and really simple. So today we're going to be making a bruschetta, which is it's kind of like a sort of sauce or a dip that you can put on toast. It uses tomatoes, garlic, fresh basil. So if you haven't, please go get some fresh basil from your garden and rinse it off real quick. Salt, pepper, and a little bit of olive oil. And we're just going to be mixing these, chopping these things together evenly and mixing them together to create a really nice, refreshing flavor. This is something that's really great for a day when it's really hot and you don't want to microwave anything or cook anything on the stove because it'll make the hot house even more hot. It's just nice and refreshing. It's a really great snack to make for your parents or guardians when they come home and they're tired and they're maybe a little bit hangry. So you can just whip it up real quick, put it in the fridge, and when they come home, have it ready. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to chop our tomatoes. So I want you to use your bear claw technique to hold onto your tomato, and we're going to cut across the top just to remove the stem part of our tomato. We're going to do this on both of them. And then what's going to happen is this is also going to create a really nice smooth texture for us to lay our tomato down on the cut side so that we can cut our tomato down the center and it doesn't move very much. Next, we're going to lay it flat again so we have a nice, even, smooth surface for it to be on that's not going to slip very much. Again, using our bear claw, we want to hold it in place and we want to cut it across into about 4 little long slices. With these knives, it depends on what your tomatoes feel like. So your tomatoes might be kind of soft already. If they are, it's going to be easier for you, instead of cutting on the side with the skin, to flip it over, and it's a little mushier and more wet, but it's easier to chop on this side with our safety knives. So if that's the case for you, if your tomato's kind of soft already, then I want you to flip your tomato over and then hold it securely in a bear claw, and then we're gonna cut them into a dice. From our first week, you might remember that a dice just means that we're cutting something into a kind of small bite-sized piece. So we're going to do this with all of our leftover tomato, and then we're going to put it aside into our serving bowls. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do now that we have all our tomato chopped up is we're going to add a little bit of salt to our tomato. We've talked about this before, but salt can be used for a lot of different things. It can be used for science and it can be used for flavor, right? And the salt for this is going to do both. But what we want to do is add a little bit of salt, because what the salt is going to do is it's going to draw some of the water out of the tomato. You'll see when we're done cooking our bruschetta that it's not just going to be chopped tomato that's seasoned, but there's going to be almost like a little bit of a sauce at the bottom of the bruschetta, And what's going to cause that to happen is the salt. The salt is going to draw that liquid out, and it's going to create a nice base for the kind of saucy part of the bruschetta. So if you want to use a measuring spoon, then start with half a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to use my fingers, and I'm just going to spread this kind of evenly around. We'll probably end up adding a little bit more salt, but we just want to make sure and get our tomatoes coated right now so that that science part of drawing the water out of the tomatoes starts happening while we work on other things. So before we move on to one of the other ingredients for our bruschetta, I want to go ahead and get our Parmesan crisps ready. So when we're done with our bruschetta, we have our toast. If you have your bread at home, you can butter it if you want. If you have some of your compound butter from week 1, you can spread some of your compound butter on your toast and toast it. Have that. Go ahead and have that ready. But we're gonna have at the end, we're gonna have our toast with a little bit of bruschetta on top. And then we're gonna make some Parmesan crisps that are gonna add a nice kind of salty and crunchy texture. We've been talking a lot in our breakout sessions about the textures that we love, and I think you're probably gonna love this week because there's gonna be a lot of crunch. So the Parmesan crisps are probably the easiest recipe that we'll make all summer together. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna grab your Parmesan cheese, whether it's grated, like the kind that comes in a container, or shredded like this one. This recipe works either way. But what I want you to do is I want you to grab and make little mounds of cheese on a microwave safe plate. And we're gonna microwave the cheese for 30 seconds. One of the things we talked about this week in our breakout session is how everybody's ovens and microwaves and stoves work a little bit differently. They, maybe run a little bit hotter or a little bit cooler. But with this recipe, almost every time, you're only gonna need 30 seconds. So, but like we talked about in our breakout session, I want you to pay attention to what the Parmesan crisps look like on my plate when I take them out of the microwave. And I want you to base your Parmesan crisps on what things look like versus what I'm telling you time-wise, right? Because it's more important that you have something that is cooked correctly, whether it takes more or less time on your end versus you following the exact timeline that I'm using. But it shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. So I'm just gonna pop these in real quick and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so as always, be sure when you're taking things out of the microwave that you use a towel or a hot pad to make sure you don't burn yourself. So this is what my Parmesan crisps look like. You can see that they've kind of melted together from those individual strands. And some of them kind of feel a little bit soft still, and some of them are a little bit more starting to develop a kind of crunchy, kind of bubbly texture. This is perfect for the time being because we're gonna set them aside and we're gonna let them cool for several minutes. And even if they're kind of soft and melty right now, by the time that they cool, the air is gonna kind of dry them off and they're gonna be nice and crispy. So I'm gonna set them aside till we're ready to plate up. So the next ingredient we're gonna use is fresh garlic. So you wanna take your garlic, if you haven't peeled it yet, a really kind of easier way to peel it is to cut the top stem part off, and what it does is it opens up the way for you to be able to peel off the skin a little bit easier. I also kind of twist my garlic back and forth a little bit to help loosen up the skin. So we're gonna do our bear claw and slice our garlic into slices, really exactly the same way that we did our first week when we were making our compound butter. And then we're going to use our rock and roll technique to cut it into smaller pieces. We can sprinkle a little bit of salt over our garlic, and that's going to help give us a little bit of leverage to get it nice and smooth. Today, because we're cooking with raw garlic can kind of be a little bit of acidic. It can have a little bit of a spicy flavor to it. And since we're not cooking it over heat, we almost want to cook it in the way that we chop it up. So we want to encourage those kind of bitter, spicy juices from the garlic to release a little bit before we add it into our tomatoes. And we want to get those pieces as small as possible. So I want you to do your best kind of rock and roll technique to get the garlic nice and small so that when you're tasting your bruschetta, you don't get a huge mouthful of garlic. Okay, so my garlic is ready. It's pretty small, so I'm gonna go ahead and scoop it in to my bowl, and I'm gonna mix it around with a spoon. And I want you to pay attention to the bottom of the bowl. So you can tell already that there's a little bit of kind of this tomato liquid at the bottom. This is great. This is what we wanted to happen when we added the salt in. So we wanna mix our garlic in nice and evenly. Make sure there's not any big concentrations or clumps of garlic. Okay, and the next ingredient we're gonna add is our olive oil. If you don't have olive oil at home, then you can use just a little bit of whatever oil you have on hand. You can also use a little bit of melted butter to give it a nice kind of full flavor. But if you do have olive oil, that would be my pick just because it is like one of the staple ingredients of Italian food and it has a really pleasant flavor. So I'm going to put in 1 tablespoon of olive oil into my bruschetta and let those kind of mix together. So what you can, I don't know if you can see where you're at, but even on this spoon, right, you have a mixture of different kinds of kind of juices. You have these oil bubbles and then the tomato juice that's on the bottom and it kind of looks like they don't mix together. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix this around so that those can kind of coat each other and become less separated. And you can see the sauciness of the bruschetta is really starting to happen. There's a lot more liquid going on. But basically what we're doing is we're allowing these 3 ingredients to marinate. And what we mean when we say that is, think of the word marry. When you marry someone, you bring them kind of together. We are increasing the relationship between all of these ingredients so that they kind of get to know each other really well and they mix really evenly together. So one of our last steps is we're going to take our fresh basil and we're going to make some basil ribbons. So to do that, I want you to take the biggest leaves from your basil plant. I have probably 6 or 7 here. And what you're going to do is you're going to stack them on top of each other. And then from the stem side to the tip of the leaf, you're going to roll them in. And then you're just going to slice them. And you don't need to do much more than that. You just kind of want to toss them a little bit so that they separate. And we are going to go ahead and just put them in our bruschetta and mix it around. So the last ingredient we want to put in is a little bit of pepper. So just sprinkle a little bit of pepper over it. You don't need a whole lot because you have the garlic in there. That's going to give it a nice kind of spicy, not super spicy, but a little bit of a kick to it. And mix it together. And I'm going to go ahead and taste it. Remember that we added salt at the beginning. So we want to take a good taste to see whether the salt that we added at the beginning was enough to season the bruschetta or if we need to add a little bit more. So to my liking, that's perfect. But remember that my taste buds are not your taste buds. Maybe you used a measuring cup at the beginning and you feel like it needs maybe a little bit more salt so that you kind of really enjoy it. But for me, this is perfect. And bruschetta can be sometimes something that's really easy to add too much salt to, because when we taste the juice, we're just tasting the tomato juice and the garlic and the olive oil, but we're not tasting the tomato itself, right? Remember that when you bite into the tomato's gonna have a little bit of acidity that's gonna counteract that salt. And we wanna make sure that we don't make the salt too overpowering. So if you need to take a taste of the tomato on a little piece of toast before you finish adjusting your seasoning, that's totally fine too. So lastly, we have our Parmesan crisps here, and I'm just going to ease them kind of off the plate with the spatula. As I'm touching them, they've solidified. As they've cooled down, they're kind of crunchy. So I'm curious to see how you decide to plate up your bruschetta. I want to see your creativity. I want to see pictures of your food. Maybe you'll put some Parmesan crisps on your bread, or maybe you'll put them directly in the bruschetta. The last thing you can do, just to add a little bit of a garnish, just to make it look special, is just take a little cluster of leaves from your basil, and just lay them on top like that. And there you have it. You have some fresh bruschetta.